Today we live aside the life and work of the tyrants and villains of history, to start looking at the good guys, the people whose legacy improves the lives of their people and others. Let's start with a character who may sound familiar, Nelson Mandela. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela was born in Venzo, Transkei in 1918. He was the son of a tribe chief. He was given the name Rolihlahla, which means unruly, but at the age of 7, so that he could attend Methodist school. He was baptized with the name Nelson in the Transkei church. Already famous, his compatriots would call him Madiba, after the name of his clan. 2 years later, due to the death of his father, little Nelson was left in the care of a cousin of his, the great chief Jongintaba. With him, he became fond of listening to the tribal chiefs and became aware of the sense of justice. When he was 16, he joined the tribal council. 3 years later, in 1937, he entered the black boarding school at Fort Hare for higher education. But when he learned in 1941 that Chief Jongintaba had arranged a marriage for him, Mandela resolved to leave his village and went to Johannesburg. Fully settled in the overcrowded suburb of Alexandria, soon after his arrival, he met Walter Sisulu, with whom he formed a friendship that was to prove decisive in all areas. His influence, his political ideas, helped him get a job and finish his law studies, and introduced him to his cousin Evelyn Mays, whom he was to marry in 1944. In 1948, the National Party came to power in South Africa and institutionalized racial segregation by creating the apartheid regime. In fact, institutional racism in South Africa dated back to at least 1911, when a discriminatory provision prohibited blacks from holding skilled jobs. Numerous measures enacted in the following decades, 36 in all, that already led, to give just one example, to the exclusion of blacks and mixed-race people from the electoral roll. The triumph of the National Party of Afrikaners, while descendants of the Dutch Boers who colonized the country, corroborated the government of Daniel Malan, which put in place a complete system of segregation and social, economic, cultural, political and territorial discrimination to the detriment of the black majority. It was the so-called apartheid, or separate development of each race in the geographical area assigned to it, according to the official definition. Subsequent governments, presided over by Switchdon and Verwoerd, continued the same policy. A 1949 decree prohibited mixed marriages. Other subsequent laws and regulations completed the segregation system. Official recognition of races, segregation in the use of services, including beach space, and separation in factories and on public transport. Under Gandhi's inspiration, the African National Congress advocated non-violent methods of struggle. The Congress Youth League, chaired by Mandela, organized civil disobedience campaigns against segregationist laws. In 1952, Mandela became president of the African National Congress Federation of the South African province of Transvaal. While leading the volunteers who defied the regime, he had become the leader of the movement. The crackdown resulted in 8,000 arrests, including that of Mandela, who was confined to Johannesburg. There he established South Africa's first black law firm. He had gradually abandoned his Africanist stance and adopted the ideology of internationalist humanism that he would uphold throughout his life. In 1955, having served these sentences, he reappeared in public, promoting the approval of a Freedom Charter, which embodied the aspiration for a multiracial, egalitarian and democratic state, a land reform and a policy of social justice in the distribution of wealth. The racist regime hardened in 1956, with the government's plan to create 7 reserves or Bantustans, supposedly independent marginal territories in which it was intended to confine the black majority. This condemned them to marginalization and misery, because in those lands they could not offer a livelihood because they would be too crowded for their agriculture or for their industry to provide work for all. The African National Congress responded with demonstrations that led to the arrest of most of its leaders. Mandela was charged with high treason, tried and released for lack of evidence in 1961. During the long trial, the Sharpeville massacre took place, in which police opened fire on an unarmed crowd protesting racist laws, killing 69 demonstrators. The government declared a state of emergency and arrested black opposition leaders, including Mandela, who was detained for several months without trial. This event convinced the leaders of the African National Congress of the impossibility of continuing the struggle by non-violent methods, which did not weaken the regime and provoked an equally bloody repression. In 1961, Mandela was elected honorary secretary of the All-African National Action Congress, a new underground movement that adopted sabotage as a means of struggle against the regime of the newly proclaimed South African Republic. He was also in charge of leading the armed wing of the ANC. His strategy was focused on attacking installations of economic importance or of symbolic value. For Mandela, it was very important to exclude actions that attempted against human lives. Mandela was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Despite his captivity, he was appointed president of the African National Congress that same year. Mandela was in prison for 27 years in appalling conditions. The South African government refused all requests for his release. Nelson Mandela became a symbol of the struggle against apartheid inside and outside the country, a legendary figure representing the suffering and lack of freedom of all Black South Africans. In 1984, the government tried to put an end to the myth, offering him freedom if he agreed to settle in one of the Bantustan's, to which the regime had granted a fiction of independence. Mandela refused the offer. Finally, Frédéric de Klerk, president of the Republic of the National Party, gave in and opened the way to dismantle racial segregation. In February 1990, he legalized the African National Congress and released Mandela, who became his main negotiating partner for the dismantling of apartheid and the transition to a multiracial democracy. Despite the complexity of the process, both were able to successfully complete the negotiations. Mandela and de Klerk shared the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993. The 1994 elections made Mandela the first black president of South Africa, 1994 to 1999. From that position, he implemented a policy of national reconciliation, keeping de Klerk as deputy president and trying to attract democratic participation. Mandela initiated the Reconstruction and Development Plan, which allocated large amounts of money to improve the standard of living of Black South Africans in areas such as education, housing, health and employment, and also promoted the drafting of a new constitution for the country, which was finally approved by Parliament in 1996. A year later, he handed over the leadership of the African National Congress to Thabo Mbeki, who was destined to become his successor in the presidency. 3 months before the end of his term, Mandela announced that he did not intend to stand for the re-election. He was succeeded by Thabo Mbeki, winner of the June 1999 elections. Despite his retirement, the fervor Mandela aroused in his compatriots remained alive. In 2010, he was present at the World Cup ceremonies in South Africa and received the warm support of the crowd. In July 2013, when the leader was seriously ill, the South African population took to the street to celebrate his 95th birthday. Mandela wasn't removed from the US terror watch list until 2008, at the age of 89. He and other members of the African National Congress were placed on it because of their militant fight against apartheid. When Mandela was eluding authorities during his fight against apartheid, he disguised himself in various ways, including as a chauffeur. The press nicknamed him the Black Pimpernel because of his police evasion tactics. I became a creature of the night. I would keep to my hideout during the day and would emerge to do my work when it became dark, he says in his biography Long Walk to Freedom. From Cape Town to California, streets named after Mandela abound, but he's also been the subject of some rather unusual tributes. Scientists have named a prehistoric wood picker after him, Australopithecus Nelson MANDELA. In 1933, the Physics Institute at Leeds University named a nuclear particle the Mandela particle. He had a part in Spike Lee's 1992 biopic Malcolm X. At the very end of the movie, he plays the teacher reciting Malcolm X's famous speech to a room full of Soweto school kids. But the pacifist Mandela wouldn't say by any means necessary, so he cut back to footage of Malcolm X to close out the film. Nelson Mandela was elevated to the stature of one of the most charismatic and influential figures of the 20th century. His figure has entered history as an embodiment of the struggle for freedom and justice, and as a symbol of an entire nation. I hope you enjoyed this video and see you every day on the reels.